In terms of making mistakes as leadership, how do we show up that way? What mistakes do we share? How is being transparent going to support your team and allow them to feel comfortable about their mistakes and their errors? And when is a mistake a costly one that's damaging? Let's find out in this episode.
Voices of Victory Podcast Show. Voices of Victory Podcast Show.
It is now time for the Voices of Victory Podcast Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mario Di Leone.
Hello and welcome to Voices of Victory. My name is Mario Di Leone, and this is our mission to help leaders like you thrive with confidence, purpose, and of course, productivity. So today we're going to be tackling some important questions, some difficult ones. How should leaders handle mistakes? How should they handle their own mistakes? And how should they handle the mistakes of their staff? Now, we're not going to dive into it in 100% completion because it would be an hour and a half long topic. But we are going to go over some essence, some true potential that we can learn. Mistakes are indeed an inevitable part of life. There's no way around it. And leadership is not exempt from it. So how do we respond? Because that is going to set the tone for our teams. It's going to set the tone of understanding. And over time, I've found that there are four main ways that people typically react to mistakes. The first thing they try to do is try to bury it, try to cover it up. And this idea is really simple. If no one knows about it, it feels like it never happened. And if it never happened, then it's okay. And you got to keep in mind, this could relate or connect to unhealthy perfectionism or what we call maladaptive. But hiding mistakes can prevent growth and lead to bigger problems down the line. Believe me, it could turn into a mountain. Another thing we do is we dwell on them. Sometimes we get stuck in a loop. We get stuck in a loop of guilt, loop of shame of, I messed up, I screwed up, I effed up. And we tell ourselves all about that. We replay that life script in our head, and the feeling lingers. And it leaves us feeling very ineffective and unable to move forward. Another thing we do is we shift blame, which can be problematic. Instead of taking ownership and owning the mistake, we point fingers at other people. External circumstances are indeed important, and so are policies. And while this might feel like a quick fix, it is damaging. It's going to damage trust, damage accountability, damage your relationship with your team. Well, another thing that's really positive is we learn from them. Now, how do we learn from them? Well, with every experience, there's insights that are buried inside of it. It's like the coconut theory. There's meat inside of that hairy, ugly problem. And the healthiest response is to embrace them as an opportunity for growth, both for you and both for them. And reflect on what happened. We're going to make adjustments. We're going to move forward with greater insight and greater clarity. So that's what's crucial. So here's the big question that I have for you is, which response do you feel you want to model? Like, which is the best of them all for you? Because you need to model it, and you need to model it for your team. And if the answer is learning and growing from mistakes, finding the insights and the wisdom nuggets inside, then it's time. It's time that you yourself can lead by example. Because there's nothing worse than a leadership with perfectionist issues, like maladaptive perfectionism. There's nothing worse than that in leadership circles. Well, maybe a few things. There's bad coffee in the morning. But anyway, I want you to think about this, because if your team isn't openly sharing their own mistakes, they could be modeling the leader. And they may feel that it's not safe to express themselves and express that they made an error. So they might be hiding their errors or dwelling on them or maybe blaming each other about it. And you know what? They could be mirroring the way the leader is being. They can mirror the way the leader is responding to mistakes. And that's the power of being a role model. It's like you make it okay for them to do by that behavior. There's an old saying. Oh, wow. I remember this saying because it goes back roughly about 20 years ago. And it goes exactly like this. What gets rewarded gets redone. Let me say that again. What gets rewarded gets redone. Meaning, if you do a behavior and it's a negative behavior and you get rewarded for that negative behavior, you will indeed redo it. You will repeat that behavior because what gets rewarded gets redone, which means that your team could model your negative behavior and they can model that. They can mirror that. Now, the fact is maybe you yourself are not noticing that behavior. Or maybe you've been rewarded for that behavior. Could be through compliments, maybe jokes, camaraderie, whatever the case may be. And what it really boils down to is we need to create a culture where mistakes are stepping stones instead of stumbling blocks. So you got to be open about your mistakes. When you make an error, talk about it. Come on, bring it out into the open. Show your team what vulnerability really is and that strength that comes from reflection. You can highlight your mistakes as learning nuggets, insights, and when someone on your team makes a mistake, you can frame it up as a valuable lesson. Hey, listen, it's going to be all right. We're going to go forward, and you picked something up from this. This doesn't mean celebrating the error like a cheerleader. As long as the same mistake isn't repeated endlessly or crossing ethical lines, it's a chance for development. Now, let's talk about when mistakes are handled. When they're handled constructively, it's building blocks for stronger leadership team collaboration. That's the beauty of it. The leadership perspective here is that when you treat mistakes as problems to be avoided, you instill fear within them. And when you treat them as opportunities for learning, then you create an environment where people feel like they can make an error as a human being. Now, there's other ways to view this, and I want to break this down in a very important way. When it comes to mistakes, when there's lack of clear communication, this can be a damaging mistake. So we're going to discuss the mistakes that are actually damaging now, because there's mistakes that you can move through, and then there's mistakes that are actually damaging. So lack of clear communication is damaging. The poor communication, it can lead to misunderstandings, it can lead to fights, it can lead into missed deadlines, and of course, team conflicts. But it creates frustration amongst everybody. If they feel left out or unsure or not clear on what's going to happen next, it can be a problem. Maybe they're unsure of what's expected of them. So what should a leader do in a case like this? Well, we need to prioritize clear, concise, consistent communication across the team. We have to make that the practice. Ensure that expectations are well defined and that we provide opportunities for clarification and, of course, actively listen to your team. Hear them out. Don't just throw them on the barbecue so quickly. Another mistake that can be damaging is ignoring team feedback. Now, why is it damaging? Well, when employees feel unheard, it creates resentment, it creates disengagement, and it creates a work culture that no one wants to show up for. Okay? So keep that in mind. I only laugh because it's like I've seen this before out of irony. It's all about innovation and problem solving, but those two things will suffer when valuable input is dismissed or even ignored. So what leaders should do? Leaders must foster an environment where feedback is encouraged and valued. Actively seek input from team, right? That team should express themselves and implement suggestions where you see possible. So they're going to give you some insight, some explanations, see if it can be actioned. That's the good news. Another mistake that can be damaging is failure to address conflict. If you're a leader and you don't address conflict, tension, collaborative reduction, and of course, lack of productivity. It can also lower morale. And most of all, that good old turnover. When employees feel that their concerns are ignored, it's an issue. So what should you do? Well, first of all, confront conflicts promptly and constructively. Act as a neutral mediator. Remember, be objective. It's going to ensure that all parties are heard and everybody's going to work towards a solution. So this is important. Now, in terms of approaches to these mistakes, lead by example. Model the behavior that you want your team to be. Create a safe, open environment to foster a culture of discussion where everybody can feel like they're voicing their concerns. Now, provide regular training. That's so important. Equip your team with skills, communication skills and otherwise, conflict resolution and so on. Regular training sessions can empower the entire team and help people avoid mistakes. Acknowledge the mistakes, learn from them, and focus on what you can do. How can we learn from this? What can we improve? And stay proactive. Don't wait till issues escalate. And that's all there is for today's episode. I'll see you in the next episode.